warn you, I've been giving this talk a lot lately, and so it's Michigan themed, but I'm going to try to make it, it will be Michigan flavored instead of Michigan themed, okay? So anyways, I don't have to tell you guys, the headlines don't lie. The climate crisis is upon us. 2023 was the hottest year on record. Carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide levels reached an all-time high in 2023. So what a lot of states are doing, including Michigan, they're enacting or contemplating enacting what they call low carbon fuel standards. And this is designed to lower the carbon emissions from the transportation sector. Now, this kind of sounds good, sounds beneficial, but in reality, Senate Bill 275, which is, what it's called in Michigan, it's going to be a windfall for fossil fuel companies and energy companies, including utilities, as well as industrial scale livestock operations, in particular dairy CAFOs, rather than a true win for the environment. So, the world's increasing appetite for meat and dairy comes with a high methane price tag. You guys know we have to decrease global methane emissions drastically and rapidly to avert climate disaster. As this graph on the right shows, and as you guys probably know, methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide in the short term, trapping significantly more heat. The industrial animal sector admits they have a methane problem, and they say they have a solution. Capture methane emitted from manure with on-farm anaerobic digesters and use it for transportation fuel and to generate electricity. The rationale is that combusting methane releases carbon dioxide into the air instead of methane. So before I launch into low carbon fuel standards and digesters and digestate, can anyone point out any issues with this slide? What's wrong with this picture?
They're eating grass. This is Bonnie.
Exactly. Well, that's a part of it.
Yeah. No, shouldn't they eat shrubs or something? I thought it's better. Oh, okay.
Too many of them. A lot of cows laying down.
Yeah.
Do these look like CAFO cows?
No.
No. They look like cows sitting in a
they
pasture.
don't. So anaerobic digesters are not typically found on grass-fed, pasture-raised, and finished beef and dairy farms. Why? Because anaerobic digesters capture methane generated by the decomposition of vast amounts of concentrated livestock manure stored. The key word is stored in lagoons or deep underground pits under anaerobic, low oxygen conditions. Considerably less methane is emitted from manure deposited on pasture because it breaks down aerobically in the presence of oxygen. Plus, you can't capture methane from cow pies. So while this photo might depict cows destined for a feedlot with an anaerobic digester, it is obviously misleading, and so is the title. It should be reworded. Biogas recovery in the industrial animal agriculture sector. This photo more accurately depicts the kind of livestock facility where you will find a commercial manure to energy anaerobic digester project on a large dairy CAFO. I don't think does anybody, do I have to explain CAFOs to anybody here? I don't think so, right? They confine large numbers of animals in small spaces. The food is brought to them. They don't get to forage or feed on pasture. Right. And they produce a lot of manure. That's the key, a lot of manure. So one of our utilities in Michigan called DTE Energy, one of their divisions, DTE Vantage, has invested heavily in dairy anaerobic digester projects in Wisconsin. So, and they produce manure biogas that is actually physically transported to California or an interconnecting state pipeline for usage in California. So what does California, a Michigan utility, Wisconsin dairy CAFOs, what does that what does that have to do with anything? I will get to that. So let's quickly review the basics of anaerobic digestion. Anaerobic digestion is a biologic process that occurs in an oxygen-free environment where specialized bacteria called methanogens decompose organic materials like manure and food waste and other things we'll get to. Remember, manure stored in massive waste storage structures emits significant amounts of methane, whereas manure deposited on pasture emits considerably less. When you digest manure, it produces biogas, which is composed mostly of methane, about 60%, along with carbon dioxide and trace contaminants. Biogas can be burned directly to produce heat and electricity for use as a transportation fuel and combustion in certain electricity generators. It has to be upgraded to pipeline quality biomethane, which is also known as renewable natural gas, or RNG for short. So manure methane, biomethane, manure renewable natural gas, manure RNG, they all mean the same thing. Upgrading requires steps to remove the carbon dioxide and other impurities. So, what is organic waste? Well, it's organic as in science, as in organic chemistry, as in living organisms, not in organically grown foods, not as in organic design. I recently learned there was such a thing as organic design. Anyways, organic material contains carbon, typically bound to hydrogen. What else is in the feedstock that goes in anaerobic digesters? That's what you put in the digester. It's called feedstock. Manure is a feedstock. What else goes in there besides carbon and hydrogen containing compounds? Well, a lot of plant nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus. You guys know that. I'll get to that later. I'll talk some more about that, and a host of other stuff, not all of it good, depending on the feedstock. There is such a thing as organic industrial waste, organic pharmaceutical waste. So, organic doesn't always mean good. Bio doesn't always mean good. So anyways, the specialized bacteria that I talked about, methanogens, break down these organic compounds to produce methane. And methane is composed of, each methane molecule is one carbon atom and 4 hydrogen atoms. So what exactly is a low carbon fuel standard? They go by different names depending on the state. In Michigan, it would be called a clean fuel standards. And again, how do factory farms, California, and a Michigan utility fit in? It's a policy aimed, like I said, at lowering greenhouse gas emissions by promoting cleaner transportation fuels. All right, and manure biogas is marketed as a cleaner alternative to fossil natural gas. All right, despite the urgency to move away from fossil fuels, manure biogas comes with considerable drawbacks. Now let's get to California. Similar flawed legislation in California. California was the first kid on the block to enact a low carbon fuel standard back in either 2009 or 2011. But basically, it's turned manure into a cash cow by awarding lucrative credits or commodities. These commodities can be bought, sold, or traded on the market. They're awarded for capturing methane from manure. The market value of these credits for manure-derived biofuels has really ushered in a veritable manure rush. It delivers hefty profits for investors, but false promises for communities. Like I said, the credits are commodities that can be bought, sold, or traded on the market. And by monetizing manure, low carbon fuel standard in Michigan and other states will spur the growth of factory farms, expansions, new constructions. It leads to further consolidation, more liquid stored manure, and the continued loss of small independent dairy farms. The more manure, the more biogas, the more profit. As herd sizes increase, to cash in on poop, so will greenhouse gas emissions, which is counter to the intent of a low carbon fuel standard program. Additionally, more and bigger factory farms will exacerbate their other well-documented public health, other harms, public health, environmental, economic, and animal welfare. Okay, there we go. And Gloria, you're from Illinois, right?
indeed.
Yes. Well, first there was California, then there was Washington, then there was Oregon, and most recently in February of this year, there was New Mexico. Several other states have pending low carbon fuel standards legislation besides Michigan, including Minnesota and Illinois. And which state's going to make it to the Midwest low carbon fuel standard finish line first? I don't know, but I'm going to try to convince you why you should hope your state loses that race. And this intentionally busy slide is meant to impress upon you the many harms posed by CAFOs. All right, so I know you guys want me to get to the harmful algal bloom part, and I will. This talk is climate focused because anaerobic digesters are climate focused. They are, as I said, big ag's solution to the stored livestock greenhouse gas manure methane problem. In Michigan, Democrats are in a panic mode and, across the United States because of the climate crisis. I'm told that in Michigan, quote unquote, our Democratic legislators don't care about water quality, public health, EJ, rural communities. I've been advised that the only convincing argument against a state low carbon fuel standard is to convince them that it won't do what it claims, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So what is the contribution of industrial ag, which includes CAFOs and livestock feed crops, to U.S. greenhouse gas emissions? Significant. So over 90% of U.S. food animals are raised in CAFOs. Livestock are responsible for 1/3 of methane emissions, 1/4 from stored manure, and 3/4 from enteric fermentation, essentially cow burps. Nearly 80% of nitrous oxide emissions come from agriculture, primarily from manure and chemical fertilizers applied to croplands. The majority of U.S. cropland grow livestock feed for CAFO animals, not human food. Nitrous oxide, as you know, is a more potent and longer-lived greenhouse gas than methane. Again, 80s only capture the smaller amount of methane emitted from the back end of cows, not the greater amount from cow burps. The manure methane problem is due to vast quantities of CAFO manure stored in manure lagoons or deep underfloor pits under anaerobic conditions. Cow pies are not the problem. So, can you have your meat and eat it too? The industrial animal agriculture sector, like I said, acknowledges the climate threat, but maintains that yes, you can have your meat and eat it too, touting anaerobic digesters as a win-win solution for neighbors, farmers, and the planet. Tom Vilsack, our Secretary of Agriculture, claims that biofuels can even save family farms. After all, isn't it better to avoid emitting methane into the air from stored manure by capturing and burning it and releasing CO2 instead of, which has a lower global warming potential than methane? Not so fast. So this is an important slide. Why are manure biogas credits, low carbon fuel standard credits, so valuable, even though, okay, and this is important, manure biomethane burns no cleaner than natural fossil gas. They are both biochemically the same, nearly pure methane, and they release the same amount of carbon dioxide upon combustion. They are both combustion fuels, and they are identical. Combusting CAFO manure-derived biomethane still contributes to carbon dioxide emissions, which is, another layer of the climate issue. What is the answer? The credit values, the lower the carbon intensity score, the greater the value of the low carbon fuel standard credit. If you look over to the left, you can see that dairy renewable natural gas has a negative CI score, carbon intensity score of almost 300. If you look over here at natural fossil gas, it's got a value of 90. I just told you they burn the same. So why is this supposedly a cleaner fuel? I will take you over to the right side to explain why. California's biomethane emission crediting scheme for dairy manure grossly inflates the value due to what's called avoided methane crediting. All right. So, well, you're not releasing all that methane into the air, so it's a cleaner fuel, even though it doesn't burn cleaner. Okay. But the problem is, anaerobic digesters, again, only capture the smaller amount from stored manure, not the more significant fraction from the GI tract of cows, what we call enteric, emissions due to enteric fermentation, a specialized digestive process in ruminant animals like cows. When cattle herd sizes increase to capitalize on manure for biogas, okay, overall greenhouse gas emissions, increase. So let's move on. Oh, I wanted to mention this. Over on this right side, they say that these scores account for what they call fugitive methane emissions or methane leakage from, what I call the pit to the pump. However, there's good reason to believe that the fugitive methane emissions are underestimated. They may be, the rates are comparable to fossil natural gas and maybe even higher, as high as 15%. All right, so the greenhouse gas life cycle assessments for manure biomethane are faulty. Okay, they do not account. I just want to show you something. So you see this box here. Okay. All right. It's this box here. Okay. So, and then I've got out of the boundary greenhouse gas emissions. So these life cycle analysis fail to account for all these out of the boundary greenhouse gas emissions. We talked about enteric emissions, baseline enteric emissions, and, when CAFO expansions and new constructions occur, to cash in on manure. It doesn't account for those. Digestate, there's something called residual methane potential. You don't capture all the potential methane from manure. When you throw that digestate, which is what's left over after anaerobic digestion, you got to store that somewhere until you could do something with it. Okay, just like you had to get rid of manure, you have to get rid of the digestate. And by the way, digestate doesn't decrease in volume. Okay, so you still have a waste disposal problem. But anyways, that digestate in storage can still release methane, and depending on how the digestate is stored, nitrous oxide, and that should be N2O. So I know my chemical symbols, but anyways, depending on how that digestate is managed, stored, nitrous oxide emissions may actually increase by about 81%. And then, you factor in the increase in consolidation, which means more liquid manure. That's more methane emissions. Oh, yeah. And out of the boundary are all the carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide emissions from livestock feed production. So, these scores, they're faulty. There's something called additionality. High quality credits are supposed to be additional. It means, in the absence of those credits, whatever you did to reduce greenhouse gases wouldn't have otherwise occurred. I think the best analogy I can draw, let's say you're a kid and your parents have a household rule that you can't, you got to keep your room clean. And if you don't keep your room clean, there's going to be consequences. Well, let's say your grandmother and your aunt independently say, hey, I'll give you $5 if you keep your room clean. All right. So if the kid accepts the money, the kid was going to clean the room anyways, because the kid knew there were going to be consequences. All right. But if the kid takes the money from grandma, that's non-additional. So it's kind of a hard concept to explain, but anyways, we call it double dipping and triple dipping. These CAFOs and anaerobic digesters, they get revenue from a bunch of different pots. And they get rewarded for doing things they would have had to have done anyways, or they would have done anyways because there were other incentives. All right, so what's worth more, a cow's milk or its poop? These on-farm waste-to-energy anaerobic digester projects are not economically viable without the lucrative credits that are awarded under state low-carbon fuel standard programs and generous taxpayer support. In 2021, it cost nearly $300, over $600 if you count the capital expenses to install the digester in the first place, to get about $70 worth of biocast from the 1-year manure output of one cow. If you factor in the value of low carbon fuel standard credits, the California low carbon fuel standard credits, that cow's manure was worth almost $2,000. Like I said, taxpayer funded subsidies and grants sweeten the manure biogas pot, often paying for a chunk of the capital expenses. California ratepayers help subsidize related infrastructure, such as new gas pipelines, and the IRA and the Farm Bill currently promote biogas recovery. Even though the milk is worth a lot, the manure is worth more. The manure is worth a lot. Interestingly, the California low carbon fuel standard didn't take off until several years after it was implemented. And it corresponds to that point in time when the CI scores for livestock manure were adjusted. They instituted this avoided methane crediting, and that's also the same time frame when the California State Ag Department started helping defray the capital costs of these digesters, which can run into the millions. So manure biogas allegedly replaces dirtier fossil fuels, making the credits even more valuable. While we may be importing less fossil natural gas and oil, U.S. fossil natural gas and oil yields and exports are on the rise. Is commercial manure biogas production merely freeing up more fossil natural gas for export, adding to the bottom line of extractive oil and gas companies without actually reducing global greenhouse gas emissions? It doesn't matter if you reduce fossil fuel consumption within state lines. If global fossil fuel consumption increases, greenhouse gases don't respect man-made boundaries. So these state low carbon fuel standards allow energy companies to essentially hide on farms, benefiting from right to farm laws and other protections, exemptions afforded to agricultural enterprises. And these are, truly colossal industrial methane gas manufacturing complexes. They infringe upon the rights of rural residents, and they really pockmark the rural landscape. Farming operations by any stretch of the imagination. So I mentioned that, and so this is what you guys this slide is what you'll be most interested in. Digestate, which is what is left over after anaerobic digestion, is not as safe as biogas proponents claim. Nutrient pollution could actually worsen, and odors and germs, pathogens remain a problem. The nitrogen and phosphorus compounds in digestate are more water soluble. The industry tries to spin this as a good thing. Oh, anaerobic digestion makes the nutrients more plant available. What they fail to also say is that the nutrients, because they're more water soluble and they go with the flow of water, that is, they're more likely to run off to surface waters and leach into groundwater, causing, as you know, harmful algal blooms and fish kills in lakes and rivers and toxic nitrate levels in private drinking water wells. It is my opinion that the agronomic rates for digestate should probably be adjusted downward, precisely because the nutrients are in more plant available form. But that would translate into the necessity for more spread fields. And you can imagine how the intensive livestock industry would respond to that suggestion. Depending on how digestate is stored, nitrate oxide emissions, as I mentioned this previously, may increase. Although ammonia is not a greenhouse gas, it's environmentally harmful. Anaerobic digestion may increase ammonia emissions by as much as 81%. Again, depending on how it's stored, what goes up must come down. The deposition of ammonia emissions is a source of surface water nitrogen pollution that is unaccounted for by CAFO nutrient management plans, which only address the land application of manure. Digestate is not an innocuous, nutrient-rich soil amendment organic fertilizer, as manure biogas proponents like to say. And its disposal land application should be strictly regulated, not deregulated, as some industry proponents argue. We even have a state representative who is actually trying to deregulate digestate and pass it off as, organic fertilizer. All right, other concerns. Waste and investment management companies like Vanguard Renewables and BlackRock also want a piece of the biogas pie. They too are investing in on-farm anaerobic digester projects. Now, here's something that should alarm you guys, okay? So the proponents of co-digesters maintain that this is or digesters and co-digesters. This is a way to better manage nutrient pollution. What a co-digester does is it takes some manure, 20–30% manure. The rest is the organic fraction of municipal or industrial waste that is trucked in from elsewhere. So you're bringing more nutrients. And the reason they do this is because you get the best biogas yields if you combine a smaller amount of manure with organic waste from other sources. So you're bringing more nutrients, okay? So I'm not quite sure how that's supposed to help a farm manage its nutrient problems. And these are, like I said, big operations. This is about 36 square miles, that circle there.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, would you like this for your neighbor? Yeah, okay. You
Jeez.
thought CAFOs were bad. Yeah. I'm not going to go into this. Let's see. Oh, so yeah, I've already kind of discussed this, the different kind of anaerobic digesters. As I mentioned, they break down organic waste under low oxygen conditions. On-farm, there are on-farm and I guess off-farm or non-farm digesters. On-farm digesters include only or mostly manure, which can accept limited food waste. And then the co-digesters that I already mentioned. The non-farm digesters, community digesters to handle municipal waste, food waste. These aren't necessarily a bad thing, okay? And then we also have digesters at wastewater treatment plants and landfills. And again, I don't think that these non-farm digesters are necessarily a bad thing. And I think there's probably a role, okay? I mean, think about it. Digesters, standalone digesters, regardless of location, are people going to throw away more food, eat more and waste more food? Are they going to go to the bathroom more? Are they going to throw away more trash? You're not going to, but with an on-farm digester, you're going to incentivize greater herd sizes and more manure. Oh, this explains why a combination of manure and municipal industrial waste is desirable if you're a biogas proponent. The feedstocks down here have lower biogas yield. The feedstocks up here have higher biogas yield. And isn't this interesting? That cattle manure is the lowest yield feedstock. Why is that? Well, if you think about it, the gastrointestinal tract of a cow is kind of like it's an anaerobic digester. So a lot of the manure is pre-digested. So that's why there's a lower biogas yield. What's valuable about the manure is there's a lot of it. Okay, so if you have a lot of manure, you can still get a lot of, methane from it. Plus, it contains those specialized bacteria. We don't have methanogens because we're not ruminants, all right? So the manure does have value, but I thought this was interesting. Let's see, the dairy cow in the room. Manure biogas is a lifeline for businesses profiting from gas and threatened by the electrification movement. Energy companies, oil and gas, utilities are the primary beneficiaries of these credits, and they are behind the push. What these credits allow these companies to do, they can reap these rewards and they can use those credits to claim net zero emissions, even though they're not actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions from their dirty, polluting core industries. And if they have credits left over, they can sell them to other companies who do the same thing. The other important thing to remember is that investing in renewable natural gas, livestock, manure, biomethane, is that it requires investment in new gas infrastructure. So, incentivizing manure biogas really will entrench dependence on gas and delay the transition to truly green, clean, renewable energy sources, solar and wind and geothermal. All right, I'm not going to go into that. The gas isn't always greener or cleaner. Renewable energy is constantly and relatively quickly replenishable. Well, I guess you could say that about manure. Green energy comes from a natural source. Well, manure comes from a natural source, but there's really nothing natural about how CAFO animals are raised. Clean energy emits negligible pollutants, greenhouse gas emissions, and chemical contaminants, pollutants. Well, manure biogas isn't clean. The life cycle greenhouse gas emissions and pollutants are assessed. California is actually at a crossroads. They're receiving a lot of criticism. They've had a lot of experience, and the California Air Resources Board is proposing to drastically reform the program by phasing out low carbon fuel standard crediting and avoided methane crediting for dairy and swine and other renewable natural gas projects because they promote gas combustion, contrary to the state's electric future goal. Biomethane, as I said, burns the same as natural fossil gas. They are both combustion fuels. It's an excuse to build new rural gas infrastructure, entrench dependence on gas, blah, blah, blah. Okay.
Cheryl, we've got a question. Debbie?
Oh, okay. I think I have maybe two. This is second to last slide. Should I just?
I'd like to make a point when you're done.
Okay.
Okay. So the key take-home points, methane lock-in. There's three things I want you to remember: methane lock-in, fake math, and dark waste. Manure biogas will lock the U.S. into gas. I already explained why. Fake math. I explained why the CI scores are, falsely low. So I won't go into that again. Dark waste, digestate regardless of feedstock and post-digestion processes. Some of these digester projects, they employ solid liquid separation and say, oh, that helps us manage the nutrients better. The solid fraction contains relatively more phosphorus. The liquid fraction contains relatively more nitrogen, but again, depending on what's done with those, you still have nutrients to get rid of. And this is the last thing, I mentioned anaerobic digesters are the industry's solution to the back-end problem. Here's some innovative solutions to the front-end problem. And these are seriously things that our taxpayer dollars, Bill Gates dollars and our taxpayer dollars are actually paying for. And, modifying cattle diet may have some merit. But I don't know about the cow mask thing. That just doesn't seem right to me. So I will close by saying, while technologic and managerial solutions within the livestock sector can help reduce agricultural methane emissions alone, they are insufficient. A holistic approach is crucial. There's a growing consensus that dietary shifts towards less meat, better meat, that is meat that is organic, regeneratively pasture raised and finished, and more plant-based foods are necessary to achieve our climate goals. I will stop there.
All right.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Cheryl, do you want to stop the screen share and we can do some questions?
Yeah, let's see. Stop share. And that's my short version.
Yeah.
A lot. Debbie?
So methane digesters were around a long time before what California did or what USDA is doing or any of that. And I happened to be friends with a guy that had a pilot project with a small dairy. And they proved with this pilot project that the dairy could generate methane to use at the dairy.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up. And as Sierra Club members, it's important to know that Sierra Club and myself, that's less important to know than I myself, but are not opposed to what you are describing, okay? These on-farm biodigesters that are used for what they call CHP, combined heat and power, to fuel the farm residents, the farm operations. If there's a little extra energy left over, it gets fed to the grid and they might get a little money back or some credit for their, electricity and gas bills. That's okay. All right. That farmer is not partnering with Chevron or Shell or BP and building monstrous. I showed you that picture. These facilities are monstrous. Not only are there the anaerobic, the CAFOs, the anaerobic digesters, there's the upgrading facility, they have to be injected, into the pipeline. So there might be fuel injection substations there. So it's totally different, but I'm glad you brought that up, Debbie. There's so many things to talk about that I can't, unless I had 2 hours to speak, and I didn't have 2 hours to speak, and you don't want to listen to me speak for 2 hours. But yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because we're not opposed to that.
You're right. There's a lot of information here. Is there any way to could you forward your PowerPoint?
I can do that. Yeah.
Okay, thank
Give
you.
me a little time to do it because
Sure.
I tweaked it some. I mean, as long as you don't mind the Michigan stuff in there. But yes,
Fine.
and I can give you my speaker notes. Give me about a week to do it because it's in a format, my speaker notes that I understand, but to make it a little clearer for you. But yes, I'm happy to share it.
Thank you.
Most people ask because, yeah.
Doris?
Plus, Gloria, we'll have access to what you reported too. So
Yes, we'll have a recording.
that would be
Yes.
good.
You guys, I've been studying this for over 2 years. All right. This came on my radar over 2 years ago. And I don't know, something in me just, I just said this is wrong, and I've been studying it and fighting it. And, so I've been researching this and talking about this writing about this for a long, long time.
Doris?
Well, I cannot thank you enough, Cheryl, for explaining this to us. Our house in Portland, Oregon uses gas from CAFOs in the Middle West. It goes into your pipeline from big CAFOs and goes into something called Northwest Natural Gas, which is professional gas. So I feel very guilty and don't like it that they do that. But my question is, I worry about the digestate from especially the non-farm digesters. Is anybody regulating toxins in the digestate?
Oh, and remember I said, and a bunch of other stuff, what's in the feedstock,
Right.
I mentioned carbon and hydrogen and nitrogen and phosphorus and a bunch of other stuff. That's a whole talk in and of itself. So that's a really great question. In particular, yeah, I mean, heavy metals, other toxins, PFAS. Okay, these co-digesters, what they do, they take a lot of municipal food or municipal waste and industrial food waste, which is packaged in plastics. So they don't put the plastic in the digester, but they use these depackaging facilities that are usually on site, and they separate the food waste from the plastic packaging. But if you know anything about PFAS, it can leach from the packaging, into the food. And so, yes, there's actually significant concern. It requires a lot more study. We need more data, but there is concern that, yeah, the digestate contain PFAS, heavy metals, it still contains pathogens. While it's true that anaerobic digestion does reduce the pathogen count, doesn't eliminate it, and then you take that digestate and you store it wherever you store it for however long you store it until you figure out what to do with it. Bacteria are pretty promiscuous, and I wouldn't be surprised if the bacterial counts just increase right back to where
They
they
can be
were.
promiscuous because they don't need anybody else.
What's that?
I'm teasing you. They can be promiscuous because they don't need anybody else.
Well, this is true. Yes.
I think
And that is from a science teacher. So you can trust me. She's right. She knows what she's talking about.
Bonnie, did you have a question?
Two, do they need to heat the manure to make the methane? And secondly, can they use any of that compost, the nitrogen? I'm really concerned about the nutrients released from this, nitrogen and phosphorus. Can they mix that with something and sell it to golf courses or
Well,
something to
okay.
not put it in the groundwater? That's insane.
You're asking a couple of very good questions, and I'll start with the first question, which is, do they need heat? They do need to be heated. Yes. Okay, so that's an energy input. And if you have these digesters in, more northern climates, that can be problematic. So yes, there's an optimal thermal range. Yes. And that's an energy input, especially during the winters. And your other question about can they, and they claim, okay, they being, manure biogas proponents and manure co-digester proponents, they claim that this is a better way to manage nutrients. In theory, so there's digestion, and then some facilities opt to employ post-digestion processes. All right, and those can include, most commonly include solid liquid separators. So they separate the digestate into a solid fraction and a liquid fraction. A lot of times they use, anything that's heavy and wet, you can't really transport that. You kind of got to use that, on the farm. So they can't just dump it. Remember, it's got nitrogen in it. And
Oh yeah, it's awful. Yeah.
In addition to having the manure storage facilities, now you got to have digestate storage facilities, waste storage structures. All right. And they do use it to irrigate crops. All right. And I think they do have to account for the nitrogen content, at least in those states where it's really the regulation of digestate whether it's, you know, digestate liquid plus solid combined or it's separated, it's really a regulatory limbo. Okay,
Is
it
it?
really is. And here's the thing about the solid waste. So that's phosphorus rich. Now, because it's solid and a lot of the liquid's been removed, in theory, you could actually take that off site and deliver that phosphorus rich product where there's phosphorus deficiencies. Okay. And we know, you know, we have phosphorus excess and we have phosphorus deficiency depending upon where, you know, what you're talking, what geographic area you're talking about. You know, they use it for quote unquote bedding for cows. Okay. So but the problem is, you know, if you ever had a hamster, you have to change the bedding. It gets soaked with urine. You got to change the bedding. So what do you do with the bedding? All right. Well, they land apply it. Okay. So you
Yeah.
see the problems. You see the problems. And like I said,
Win.
that liquid digestate, depending on the liquid fraction that is stored until they can, you know, use it to irrigate and, you know, for crop, you know, to provide crop nutrients, depending how it's stored, it can release ammonia. All right.
In the winter. Okay.
And again, you know, volatilized ammonia, you know, contains nitrogen. What goes up must come down. I talked about that. So yeah, it's a nightmare.
We've got to get about 10 minutes worth of meeting done here, but I can see there's a lot to know here, and
Yeah.
this has been wonderful, Cheryl. Let me